welcome back to the Be More podcast, where we inspire you to be a little bit more of every role within the Salesforce ecosystem and beyond. For today's episode, we are talking what it takes to be more hands-on. I'm joined today by Saman. So can you go ahead and introduce yourself for our audience, please?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. And thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. First, congrats too on 50 plus episodes.
Thanks.
That Vanessa was a great host. She was funny. There was definitely a lot of fun on that episode. But anyway, so my name is Saman. I'm a senior software engineer and a delivery lead at Okta. I work with some really amazing and smart people, both from the engineering side and the product side, where we really come together to leverage Salesforce, namely CPQ and Service Clouds are the areas I work in to help fuel the company's scale and growth. So that's a lot of fun. I'm also the founder of campapex.org. It's a completely free platform that provides interactive, hands-on lessons and challenges for trailblazers of all kinds. It's a place where I've built kind of like bite-sized lessons and paired them together with challenges to help you learn Apex or SOQL, and also put together a project-based curriculum where you follow along with user stories to build out flows and validation rules. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to this conversation today, and I'm glad the whole Camping X thing is definitely a gift. I've used it myself.
You were an early adopter, Tom. I remember like within a month of me launching it back in like early 2023, you were on there, so appreciate it.
Yeah, it was good to get started, and it was for me. I was able to transfer what I do in Flow over to Apex and
hmm
start to understand some of the common kind of threads. Now we're going to kind of dive into the role of being more hands-on. And if you want to try to explain that to somebody, like, what does that actually mean, do you think? What does it take to kind of be hands-on in your role?
That's a great question because obviously I interpreted ask a little more abstractly. Of course, in
Mm.
my literal job in my day role, I'm a developer. Right? I'm a senior software engineer and a delivery lead. I help build solutions on the Salesforce platform. But my goal is not to necessarily always be a developer, right? Who knows what the future has in store? There's one constant there. And that is that in my role, it's always been about being hands-on. Reflecting on my career, and even before that during college years, or even just being a kid, I've consistently sought out opportunities to dive in, get involved, and learn through direct experience. And it's really about being active versus being passive. And I think that goes into being an active learner to some extent,
Mm.
but also just an active participant, an active partner in whatever life throws your way. And I think having that mindset throughout my life has served me really well. Now, granted, I think I'm very fortunate to be in the situation I'm in. I came from what I would consider to be a privileged background, right? I got a chance to grow up in America. I had a solid family life. I was able to go to college right after high school. I studied computer science and I got an internship where I was able to discover Salesforce and then it kind of just took off from there, right? But I know that's not the reality for a lot of people, probably for most people. And I've been fortunate enough through that Camp Apex community to meet so many people that are willing to roll up their sleeves and take an active role in achieving their goals, whatever that means for them. And it's really helped put things into perspective for me too, but especially in being able to consider the distance someone's kind of traveled to get to where they are. So I think with all that, what I can do is acknowledge some of the privilege that I've had while also kind of realizing I took steps to prepare myself so that when those opportunities came to me, I could take advantage of them. And that preparation that I did was by being hands on. It was being an active learner, an active member of my community. And I think that's why the role of being hands on is so important to shine a light on and to talk about. Because not all of us will have the same number of opportunities, right? The equality
Mm.
is definitely not there. But what can we do to boost equity, either for ourselves or our peers in the ecosystem who we want to see succeed? And what can we do to ultimately, make sure that when opportunity knocks on the door, that we open that
Mhm.
door wide and we have a smile on our face, right? Because we're ready to face that challenge. And I think the answer there is to be hands on, be prepared, and being an active member of your world. So that's why I'm super excited to talk about
I love that kind of notion of having the door open for everybody as well. I think that's super important. And I'm going to throw in a bonus question for you now. And this is maybe based on my own experience. So curious what you think. When being hands on, sometimes you make mistakes, right? For me, those mistakes are super helpful and super important. And I embrace them because I learn from them and then learn not to do the same thing again. Do you have similar kind of relationship with your
No, absolutely. And I think the first thing to do there is to recognize the differences between active and passive learning. So it sounds like what you're
Mm,
talking about there is very active, right? Because you're actually taking that risk, you're being involved, and sometimes you're getting hurt because of it, right?
yeah.
But ultimately, like deep work, deep learning is hard work, right? It
Mm,
requires effort to get involved. There is a study that I know about that I can talk about real quick if that's okay. So I can share the link if you wanted to share it with the audience too. But there was a study out of Harvard where they compared students' kind of perception based self-reported perception of learning versus their actual learning. So they had two groups. They put one group through a passive learning style where they just had them sit in on a lecture. They all they did was listen to the professor speak. They put a different group though through an active lecture. They still got a pretty similar lecture, but they had opportunities to actually be involved in the material, whether that was active discussions, labs, or exercises. And at the end of the lecture, they had both groups of students rate themselves after the lecture to kind of evaluate how much they think they learned. Now, the students that underwent the passive lecture, they rated themselves very highly. They thought they learned a lot. And the students who went through the active lecture, they rated themselves a lot lower. And that's not looking too good, right? It's not looking too
mm.
good for me with this whole hands on topic either. But there's a catch to it. And the catch is after the self assessment, they gave each group a quiz over the topic from the lecture. And the active learning group actually did way better on that quiz than the passive learning group, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? The
Mm,
passive group thought they learned more, but they actually did worse on the quiz. But it ultimately means that the active group learned and retained more. So the question is what happened, right? And like I said at the beginning, deep learning is hard. So they interviewed them afterwards, each group, and they found that the ones that went through the active learning style had to deal with a lot more frustration and confusion while they were learning. And that's not because the hands on challenges that they were faced with were hard or improperly put together, right? But it's because it caused that group to face the reality of the material. Did you actually understand what the lecture was
mm.
saying at a deeper level? Did you connect the concepts together? Did you actually understand what's going on? Or did you just kind of convince yourself you understood what's going on? And I think that resonates with what you were saying, right? You put yourself out there, you go to apply what you're learning, and you end up becoming frustrated, you make mistakes, you doubt yourself, and everything that comes with it. But at the end of the day, you're probably learning more than the person sitting across from you who's just watching a YouTube video, right?
I love the study putting that into context as well, because you then got like the facts and the science behind what you're saying as well, which is
Right?
awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's nice to be on the right side of science for a change.
For a
Yeah.
change, but that we'll save that for a separate podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole episode of itself thing.
Yeah,
Anyway,
there you go.
how does being kind of a hands-on learner really, how does that interact with other roles? Like what type of other people would you kind of work with to be more hands-on, do you think?
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about being hands-on.
Mm,
It inherently involves interaction, right? That's the
yeah,
very nature of the role, so you can't avoid it.
yeah.
So when you're hands-on, you're active, you interact, and in some way, shape, or form, and I think this is the important part, is that you're dealing with a feedback loop. And I think there's three main types of those feedback loops. One are interpersonal interactions, right? Those are the interactions that you have with other people, especially in a workplace setting, like our teammates. And it's things like, well, when I talk to this person, how do they treat me? How do they talk back? How do I interpret that? And how am I going to respond next time? There's system feedback loops, right? And those are when we're engaging with tools and technologies, reflecting on processes, improving workflows, whatever that is. And then there's the intrapersonal uh, feedback, right? And that's reflecting on our own work, learning from our mistakes, and kind of growing from those skills. But let me, for a second there, focus back on your question about giving you an example of something that I do weekly in my role as
Yeah.
more literally like a hands-on developer. And that would be, let's say, like backlog grooming and refinement sessions. Backlog in that context is essentially a prioritized list of requirements or work. It's been vetted, it's been reviewed, and it's ready to work on as soon as capacity allows for it to be worked on. And backlog grooming is essentially a meeting or some other session where all the stakeholders get together and they just go through the material together. They maintain it by prioritizing it, understanding requirements, asking questions, making sure that the work is ready to go. As a developer, I could definitely, very much so, get away with just sitting in those backlog grooming sessions and those backlogs calls and just not say anything.
Mhm.
After all, I'm just a developer.
Yeah.
Tell me what you want me to build and I'll build it, right? That's all I want to do. But that's very passive, right,
Mm,
Tom? That's super passive. I'm not engaging with the material or the other people in that meeting. I'm not helping improve my own abilities, right? Thinking again, just for the job I have today, but the one I want tomorrow. And I'm not helping push the team forward.
wow.
Well, so that makes me wonder, how does me asking questions or being involved and being hands-on, what does that look like and why is it helpful? Well, I think the thing is, and you've probably experienced this too, as you advance in your career, especially for developers, you kind of start realizing that building software is actually pretty easy. But building the right software is where things start to get hard,
Mm,
right? And beyond just rapid iteration and experimentation, like those buzzwords that you hear in high tech companies, engaging with your customer is so important. And that's where being hands on, I think, comes into the picture. And in the context of those backlog refinement sessions, again, that could be a situation where I just do nothing. I just let the business owners and the product owners talk it out. I could just sit there. But I
right.
choose to be actively hands on by asking, let's say, clarifying questions. And with those clarifying questions, my goal is to share a common problem with the business and not just a solution with them or a set of requirements. So, those, to give you an example, are things like asking for the backstory of where an idea for this user story came from. Understand why it's important to the business. Why is it giving them value? And just try to work with them to understand roughly where they want to take this idea and just roughly how they want to solve the problem. I want to help eliminate preconceived solutions, erroneous assumptions, ask how we're going to measure success, and then overall really come together to facilitate that understanding. Because, especially as our role as a developer, solve the right problem, you got to pull it back and get hands on. And ultimately, our job as a developer is to take what we've learned and use it as context to find the shortest technical path to solve whatever problem we're solving. And that's where you start weighing the trade offs. You start talking about all the software ilities, talk through dependencies with other systems, and then our lovely never ending conversations or debates between, flow versus Apex, right? And those are the values that you start seeing not only for your team, but for yourself too, right? Especially if you don't always see yourself being a developer, always just being an admin. You want to move on to architecture, you want to move on to solutions design, you want to move into management. It's a great opportunity to go practice those skills, be hands on. So if someone knocks on your door and say, "Hey, the architect just left. We need you to fill in the spot," you can step into that role and be successful.
I love like the definition of a backlog grooming session as well. And in fact, I worked with a client once where I feel they did this really well. The
Hmm.
developers were on the call, and the developers had the responsibility of assigning the story points, which represented the effort. And also, the client was always encouraging the developers to think, okay, we're going to change this and this lightning component.
Hmm.
What impact would it have on something else? Like it was
Yeah.
just a conversation, and also kind of a little bit about what the solution was going to be as well, and debating the right solution was kind of part of that too. So yeah, I think that those sessions can be really great and collaborative when everybody at the table, whether they're developer, consultant, architect, admin, when everybody's having a say, right?
Everyone getting a seat at the table, everyone being a stakeholder, because at the end of the day, we're being paid to build and maintain a system. We should all, to some extent, play our role, but also be able to feel comfortable being a part of the conversation for how it gets built.
Or as somebody that's in a role and they're trying to be more hands-on, how do you fit that in amongst your other responsibilities, or do you manage to kind of make it part of your responsibilities to kind of be hands-on and test things as well? How does that work in reality?
Yeah, I think the being hands-on, it's embedded in every role. It's part of every role. It doesn't matter if you're an architect, a CEO, or a junior developer. You have the opportunity to be hands-on and be an active member of that team. So I think it's up to everyone, and it looks different based on your role. I
Yeah.
can probably walk you through another example of what that would look like for a developer, especially in like a more day-to-day setting. And that's something that I do every day, which is actually writing code, right? It's
Uh-huh.
yet another opportunity every day of deciding, do I want to be passive or do I want to be
Yeah.
active? Do I want to be hands on or do I want to be hands off in autopilot, right? Like,
Mm.
say you got a user story, you're asked, and the requirements are fully fleshed out, everything looks good. But, like, let's say they asked you to build something, you need to go add a new action to a flow, or you need to go write a new method in your trigger handler, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you could look through the code real quick, find a decent spot to put your logic, add your logic. You go and test it, make sure the requirements are met. If there's any existing tests, they pass. And then what do? You dust off your hands, you get up and you
Yeah.
leave, right? But that's being a little passive, I would argue, right? Is
Mm.
that fair to say?
Yeah, I think
I would
so.
think
Yeah.
so, because at least for me, like if I did that, from time to time, that's all you need to do. That's fine, but most of the times I would say I'm not being curious enough, right? I wasn't eager to be aware of my surroundings. And I think yet again, I robbed myself of an opportunity for growth. I robbed myself of the opportunity to, let's say, understand the context and the dependencies of the flow or the trigger that I'm updating to make sure
Mhm.
it integrates seamlessly, right? I didn't give myself a chance to review surrounding code. Instead of just adding a method, I could have examined the related code, let's say, to see if I understand the context, if there's any dependencies, if there's duplication. And without realizing it, I've been making a choice of, do I want to be active? Do I want to be hands on? Or do I just want to kind of go on autopilot?
I love the thing about being more curious because I think that is important as well. Asking questions should never be kind of spoken down or put down for that because
Yeah.
I think that that's important. And I think maybe, at least in my mind, the way I summarized it is to be kind of less literal, like
Hmm.
e.g., write this code. It's
Yes.
actually thinking about this code in the context of whatever else might be there already, right?
Yes. We all exist in a context.
Now thinking about this, if there were two, three bits of advice you would give to somebody that was looking out to be more hands-on, what tidbits advice would you give that person?
I think we summarized it pretty well when we were talking about that whole deep learning thing. But I think the first thing to do is just recognize the differences between being active and passive. Think about the scenarios in your day-to-day life. And again, it doesn't always have to be work related. It could be your relationships with your significant other. It could be relationships with friends and family. It could be the relationship you have with yourself, right?
Mm.
About how much of those relationships are you taking an active role in and how much are you just being passive about. And I think it's kind of almost like a subcategory of intention, almost, and just being
Yeah.
intentional with yourself about why you're doing the things you're doing and the motivations you have behind them. So I can't necessarily give any like advice or tips other than just go outside, touch grass, and try to get in tune with yourself, right? What's important to you? Where do you want to see your life go? What goals do you have for yourself? Yeah, I mean, like we all care and want to do good work, but at the end of the day, like we all have friends and families that we love. We want to go out and eat good food. We want to enjoy the sunset from time to time. So keep that in the back of your mind and just try to be intentional with the decisions that you make.
Yeah, I think being more intentional is a great takeaway there. And trying to stick in the metaphor here, and bear with me, we'll see how this goes. Go outside, touch the grass, but also think about if you change that grass, what impact are you going to have on the wildlife or the animals, whatever. But
Let's go. Snaps, Tom.
yeah,
Snaps. You killed it.
yeah. Think about it that way, right? And think about ecosystem, whatever it is, you're going to change something. What's going to be the impact? I think that's super important. Okay, so now thinking about your own journey to kind of being more hands-on, if you were to start out again, is there anything you would change or do differently?
To be honest, I'm gonna be a little vulnerable here, Tom. It's probably just to be more empathetic to myself, be
Mm,
kinder to myself, right?
yeah.
But kind of like what I was saying with the last question is like we're all here on Earth. We're all just trying to do our best, just trying to get by and get to another day and be a little bit better than we were yesterday, right? But we have friends, we have family that we want to spend time with. We want to, make a nice home for ourselves. We want to have good food, all that. But I guess more objectively to answer that question instead of going into my sad boy era,
Yeah.
it would be to just be honest with yourself, right, about your goals and why you want to achieve them, right? Don't be obsessed with being the best at something. Just focus on being the best version of yourself.
What you were saying there reminded me of something that I shared to London's Calling on the topic of we are all imposters.
Hmm.
And something that you said really resonated with me there because at the end, my slide, my first point, like the key takeaways was be kind. And it's not only be kind to others, but be kind to yourself is really important. Be realistic with the goals
Yeah.
that you're setting and also let go of this perfectionist thing if you have it because you're aiming for something that isn't possible. You're going to
Yeah.
constantly be beating yourself up for being something that you can never be anyway. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I don't know if everyone resonates with this, but at times I've noticed when I have that perfectionist mentality, it's
Mm.
almost a distraction for some a more legitimate issue actually happening in my life. I use that perfectionism to distract
Mm.
myself from actually going to the cause of some pain in my life or just a issue that needs to be resolved. And it's just, I think it just goes back to being intentional and just constantly evaluating yourself and making sure you're doing things for the right reasons, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
Right.
maybe think about it as giving yourself feedback.
Hmm.
Right? You're not
Yep.
criticizing yourself. You're not turning yourself off. You're giving yourself an opportunity to improve if the same thing was to
Exactly.
happen
Yeah.
again.
Comes from a place of love for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So thinking about this now, if there were like two or three skills or attributes you would use to describe somebody that's kind of more hands-on, what kind of phrases or terms would you use?
Good question. So honestly, like 20 come to mind, right? And I could just rattle off all the skills and attributes. But
Yeah.
I'll focus on two, right? I'll focus on the two that I think are the most important. And we've actually brought both of them up at this point. So
Mm,
like hopefully you can see the reoccurring theme behind being more hands-on. And that is curiosity and
yeah.
intent. I think they go hand in hand when you're being hands-on. Your intent is the goal that you have in mind, right? A goal that you're passionate about and driven about and the reasons why you're passionate about it and you're driven towards it. And curiosity being just you wanting to know how things work, right? It goes hand in hand again with if you don't care about what you're doing and what you're learning about, you're not going to be great at it. You're not going to be motivated to do your best, and you're not going to be motivated to deal with the frustration and the pain and the complexity that comes with taking an active approach to life and being hands-on.
I'm glad the word curious came up again because that was definitely the top one that came in my mind when I asked
Yeah,
that question. So
look at us sharing a brain cell, Tom.
I know, I know.
Already, dude.
So thinking about your journey again and kind of in this reflective era really, along that journey you perhaps come across some misconceptions or people think of hands-on and they think of this thing. Maybe they think of a developer in a dark room writing a whole bunch of code, right? And they might consider that hands-on. What kind of misconceptions do you come across, and are there any in particular that you'd like to kind of debunk or clarify for our audience, do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because we've without realizing, we've kind of answered it already
Mm,
a little bit, right, with the other questions. And one of those is that with the study I shared earlier, where folks who took that passive learning style thought they did better, right? But in reality, they were shown that they did worse and they retained less. And in terms of developers going in a dark room, and that's what it means to be hands on, I think we talked about that a little bit too, right? Where even as a developer, I'm making a decision. Do I want to implement this story passively or do I want to implement it actively? And
yeah.
do I want to think critically through all these different scenarios and all these different considerations and trade offs? Or do I just want to figure out the first thing that works, write that code, and move on with my life, you know?
Mm.
So I think we covered it well.
I love how we're kind of putting a spin on this, like passively and actively, because traditionally that kind of balance is passive and aggressive, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really important for anybody that's listening to this as well. So kind of bringing this session to a close for today, but are there any particular? Pretty sure I know which one you're going to say at least, but any particular ways for anybody that's listening to this and inspired to be more hands-on, perhaps kind of leaning into that Salesforce context, that you would shout out and kind of maybe things that have worked for you?
Yeah, for sure. And just thinking about like what's worked for me personally, it's always been projects.
Mm,
Projects where, let's say, I watch someone do something and I try to do it myself. I think through an idea of just some little prototype to build and I see if I can build it. And funny enough, that's how Camp Apex came to be, right? Just seeing
yeah.
if I can do that. But there's so many resources out there, and I think we're seeing more and more of those every day. Some of the ones that come to mind when they emphasize on being hands-on, Rad Women Code, if you're interested in
Mm,
coding, how they pair their learning materials with homework assignments. The Clicked program, I've heard a lot of great things about, right? Putting you in that kind of project environment where you can build together. What else is there that comes to mind?
Trailhead.
How could I forget Trailhead, Tom? Yeah, thank you. The original. Trailhead's
Yeah.
obviously a great place to start. Should have started off with that. Yeah, especially if you're new to Salesforce or want to, learn more about some of the out of the box features within that for sure. Yeah, and then if you're interested in learning how to code or even want to learn how to build flows and make sure you're building them correctly, campapex.org's got a lot of free stuff out there for you. So take advantage of it.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm gonna chuck in a few more now. I think the Flownetic Slack workspace is
Mhm.
great. You're exploring flows in particular your stuff. You obviously got the Ohana Slack workspace as well, and perhaps Cloud Code Academy from a
Yep, yep.
developer
What
point of view.
Warren's doing over there. Yeah, really
Yeah,
great
I
stuff.
spoke to Warren. In fact, he was on a while ago now. We spoke about that. So yeah, there's so many good things happening, so many opportunities. So to advantage of those.
I remembered one
Yeah.
more that I wanted to give a shout out. I've attended some of their Zoom sessions. They're doing amazing work. Jody with the Salesforce kind of demo jam, where she has
Mm,
folks kind of imagine up an imaginary Salesforce org and then build the automation for it. So they have something to talk about when they go out to recruiters and hiring managers. That's another awesome way too.
yeah, and it's great to kind of get that experience, confidence, and
Mhm.
maybe play something back as well, right?
Yeah, without a
Yeah.
doubt.
Okay, so if people are feeling inspired, how can they connect with you personally?
So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably a great way. It's just Saman Attar. You can search me up on there. That's really the primary means. And then we have a Slack within the Camp Apex community if you were interested in that route. But yeah, definitely reach out over LinkedIn.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time today, and hopefully, when this goes out, we'll inspire some more people to be more hands-on. So, thanks.
Awesome, Tom. Yeah, thank you so much for the time. Really enjoyed our conversation.